All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today for the second webinar of our bird identification webinar series. The topic today being waterfowl identification. This is a webinar series held with the Mushkegowuk Council Lands Resources Department in collaboration with Birds Canada. For those who don't know me, my name is Hope Hill, and I am the Carbon and Biodiversity project coordinator with Mushkegowuk Council. And today I am joined here today with Birds Canada, Lucas and Graham, and they will be going over some uh, tips, tricks, and observation uh, uh, for waterfowl identification. Um, this webinar will be recorded, so it will be available for you to refer back to later, or for those who are not able to make it today. It will be available on our Lands and Resources Facebook page and YouTube, so feel free to look at that after. Um, so with this webinar, there will also be a question and answer period at the end of the presentation, but feel free to put questions, comments in the chat, and we'll have moderating the chat. But otherwise, at the end, you feel free to put up your hand or to turn off your mic to ask any questions. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Lucas and Graham to get started. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Hope. Yeah, I'll just share my screen here. Start my slideshow. Everybody seeing that?
Yep, looks
Perfect.
good.
Great. So yeah, as Hope mentioned, we'll be doing the Waterfowl ID webinar portion. My name is Lucas Beaver. I'm the Indigenous Liaison Coordinator with Birds Canada, and my main role is to uh, keep in contact with many Indigenous nations that we work with and connect them with other members of our team. And joining me is Graham Sorensen. He's our manager for our Science in the North program. And Graham will be mainly manning the chat line and throwing in some helpful tips and answering questions and throwing in some good links for some great resources. And yeah, so waterfowl. So what are waterfowl and what makes them waterfowl? So like if you're like me, they're one of the first bird groups that you would have learned. I used to do a lot of hunting when I was younger, a lot of duck hunting with my dad. So part of that is knowing what you're harvesting. So when I was a little guy, I knew most of my ducks, and from there on, you kind of branch out to other more complex bird groups like warblers and shorebirds and whatnot. Waterfowl, they all have fully webbed feet and relatively short legs. There are a few exceptions, but most of them have fairly short legs. They have that characteristic, like kind of like Daffy Duck bill, like broad, flat, apart from the mergansers, whose bill is thin and serrated, and we'll get into that later. Their bodies are pretty chunky and plump, and they have very short tail feathers. Most waterfowl we have are short distance migrants, meaning they're not migrating to tropical regions. A lot of them spend their time on the Atlantic coast, and basically with waterfowl, as long as there's a safe place with open water and a steady food source, they can overwinter there. Um, where I am in Bonfield, Ontario, kind of near North Bay, we actually have several species of ducks that overwinter in the spillways of dams and like bubblers or people's ducks, and people feed them sometimes too. But so Birds Canada, along with Environment and Climate Change Canada, published this report a couple years ago called "The State of Canada's Birds," and it's just kind of like a snapshot of different bird groups and how they're doing in the grand scheme of things. And this has been using data from the 1970s. So as we can see up at the top, we have waterfowl with a 46% increase, which they're doing a lot better than some of the other bird groups in Canada, that's for sure. But it's a bit, uh, it's not, doesn't paint the whole picture. We see geese and swans populations have gone up by 573%, which is a crazy increase. And it's actually something like there's such thing as bird populations being too successful and they can kind of eat themselves out of house and home. And but yeah, geese and swans, Canada geese have had a huge increase. Snow geese, trumpeter swans have been brought back from extirpation in Ontario, which means they're pretty much completely wiped out from Ontario, and now they're getting more and more common, which is great to see. Now, other fowl, there's still a decent increase, 46%, with freshwater ducks, 38%, and sea ducks having a bit of a decrease of 7%, but fairly slow decrease. They're hard to study as well, so it's hard to get a good picture. But there are certain duck species that aren't doing as well, such as blue-winged teal and northern pintail. They're a species that is still suffering from declines, unfortunately. So, what features can we use to help us identify waterfowl? So, we can use size. Waterfowl have quite a big range of size. You have ducks as small as a green-winged teal that are maybe like a foot long at the most, all the way up to the massive trumpeter swan, which stands like 4 feet tall. So quite a size range, which can be useful in separating out which group of ducks you're looking at. We can look at habitat where you're seeing these ducks. Is the duck near shore? Is it diving down under the water in the middle of the lake? Is it in an agricultural field? Behavior. This can really help narrow down what species you're looking at. I mentioned birds diving before. Like, did it need a running takeoff from the water? Did you see it in a tree? And sounds. So waterfowl don't really have those nice sounds that we heard in Thomas's webinar last week on songbirds. But since they're very gregarious, like they like being around other members of their group, they can be quite vocal. So that can also help us narrow down. Did you hear like a characteristic like quack, like a classic duck quack? Did you hear loud whistling as a flock of ducks was flying over? Did you hear like peeping, like a spring peeper almost? Those can all tell us what we're seeing. So, we'll get the easiest one out of the way first, the swans. These are just massive white birds. They have short legs and long necks, and they're really kind of unmistakable for any other bird group that we have around here. They're not sexually dimorphic, which means that the males and females look very similar to each other. It's very hard to tell them apart. And in North America, we have two native species that are migratory and one non-migratory exotic species. So we'll be doing the two native species. The exotic species is fairly common in southern Ontario, but up north, the more north you go, the less common they are. So we have trumpeter swans and tundra swans. And I mentioned trumpeter swans were almost extirpated from Ontario, but reintroduction efforts have been quite successful in the past few decades, and now they're actually a fairly common sight in a lot of spaces. And this is what they sound like here. I know it's pretty quiet, but it kind of sounds like a trumpet. hence the name. Um, and another cool thing about trumpeter swans is that you'll often see them with a wing tag. I know it's kind of a blurry picture, but um, so this wing tag says 229, and I actually submitted this observation to iNaturalist, and somebody who worked with the trumpeter swan recovery program reached out to me and informed me that that swan that I observed on May 27th, 2024, was hatched in 2021 and tagged in Mushkegowuk, Ontario, which is like a couple 100 kilometers south of where I am. So that was really cool. Now, as the population recovers, we see less and less birds with these tags on them, which is actually a really good thing because it means that they're breeding naturally. And tundra swans. Oh, sorry. Another thing about trumpeter swans is they're more like likely to breed in like small water bodies, like marshy areas and stuff. Tundra swans, as the name might suggest, they breed up in the Arctic and in the tundra. And we usually only see these guys for a brief period during spring and fall migration. There's a couple different subspecies of tundra swan globally, but the one we have is called the whistling swan. Um, and I'll play the sound for you. I don't really think it sounds that much like whistling, but definitely different than the trumpeter swan, way more high pitched. Appearance wise, these two species they look very similar, but there is a couple um, handy ID tips that we can use. So for the tundra swan, I always thought it looked like somebody had kind of like pinched the white parts in front of the eye. So you can kind of see like the white is almost connected in front of the eye, whereas the trumpeter swan, we have this kind of big open area in front of the eye. What the tundra swan, it looks like somebody has kind of taken their fingers and pinched in front of their eye a little bit. Tundra swans will also have either a white or yellow spot between like kind of like below their eye almost. But they don't always have that feature. And so it's not a great feature to look for differentiating these species. Another thing with the trumpeter swan is that when it's swimming in the water, it seems like their bottom of their neck really dips below the water surface, whereas the tundra swan, they seem to be a bit more buoyant and they'll kind of sit higher up in the water. And an interesting fact for Northern Ontario, there's a pair of domestic whooper swans, which is the Eurasian counterpart of our trumpeter swan that get released into Commando Lake and Cochrane every year, which causes a lot of false eBird reports. So geese, some cute little goslings there. So geese have, like I mentioned before, have experienced a huge population boom since the 70s. They're really the grazers of the waterfowl world. Like they spend a lot of time on land, eating grass and other things like that. They're generally larger bodied and longer necked than ducks, and much smaller than swans. And geese are a very important food source for communities along James and Hudson's Bay. Um, and while the population of geese has risen significantly, they seem to have changed their migration patterns. So people have had to kind of adjust the way they harvest them, including traveling down to Eastern Ontario. So this is a species that hasn't typically been very common out east here, but is starting to get sighted more and more, the greater white-fronted goose. And you might think, well, the front of that goose is gray, not white, but that name is for this white section at the front of the face. You'll find that bird names don't always make the most sense. But yeah, the adults have white at the base of the bill. Their bill is like a kind of like a pinkish orange. And a really good ID feature when you see them from far away and they're not in flight is this long white line along their flank. So you can see this white line here. We can see it on this bird that's swimming. And another thing that really makes them stand out, especially when they're with like a group of like Canada geese or something, is these orange legs stick out like a sore thumb. They really stand out there, and they're a great ID feature. And another name for these geese is speckle bellies, because when they're flying over, you can kind of see it right now, but they have these black kind of transverse lines along their belly and their breast. So that's really obvious when they're flying over. So Ross's geese and snow geese. Snow geese much more common out east here than Ross's geese. Much bigger. Snow geese are almost the same size as a Canada goose, but they're a bit shorter necked, and they're either all white or they also come in this color phase called blue. It's not really blue; it's more like a dark, like I don't know, gray brown. But yeah, the white color morph is fairly common. I've only seen a couple of the blue ones. And Ross's geese are similar. They're just like a miniature version of the snow goose. And the Ross's geese also comes in the blue color morph. And if we look at this photo of the Ross's goose next to Canada geese, we can see that it's very small, like compared to the Canada geese, almost the size of a mallard. Um, Now, if you see one of these geese on their own and you can't compare their size to anything else, a good thing to look for is their head shape and their head features. So snow geese, they have kind of like more flat head, whereas the Ross's goose is like really round. Um, a really good feature is looking for this thing on their bill, this little opening. It's called a grin patch right here. So that's called a grin patch. And Ross's geese don't have that patch. They can show a little bit of one, but for the most part, they look like this. And another feature is that on the snow goose, the where their bill connects to their head, it's kind of comes in a bit and then it comes out again and then comes in again. Whereas this Ross's goose, it's just kind of like straight up and down. Like it doesn't go in or out. It's just straight up and down. And yeah, snow geese form huge flocks of tens of thousands of individuals, and that pass through Eastern Ontario, think like Cornwall area. Um, and a lot of folks from James Bay communities come down to that area to hunt farmers' fields. Brant, this is another Arctic breeder. So we would only really see this guy during the spring and fall migration, and for a very short period. They don't tend to linger around anywhere. They kind of just decide to migrate one day, and then they don't really make a whole lot of stops on their way. Then we'll play his song or his call. Ignore the blackbird. But yeah, so their call is sort of like a more grating, like honk, as opposed to like a regular goose honk. But yeah, they're very dark. The first thing you notice is that they're very dark. The head and neck are completely black, aside from this little um, necklace, I guess you can call it, this little white patch around their neck here. And we can see that on all these birds here. And when they're in flight, they form these really strange looking flocks. Like they're not like a Canada goose where they fly in like a big V shape or like a big line. They kind of have I don't know, they fly in like a bunch of like stringy flocks. It's weird. But when they're in flight, a good feature, aside from the fact that they're very dark up front, is this white rump or white undertail coverts. So Canada goose, I think safe assumption that we all know and are familiar with Canada geese. They're one of our most commonly seen birds. Um, yeah, and I'm sure some of you have even been attacked by a couple of them. And so, just like the snow goose and Ross's goose, we have Canada goose and its mini-me counterpart, the cackling goose. And these two are particularly difficult to tell apart, um, or they can be anyways. But the main difference between these two, other than the small size, like cackling goose are about the size of a mallard as well, is that a cackling goose's bill is very, very stubby, like very short when you compare it to the length of the head. Whereas a Canada goose, their bill is roughly the same length as their head. It's more elongate. Um, and the cackling goose has this tiny little stubby bill. And it's once you see one up close, it's really obvious, but until you see one, you're going to be kind of second guessing yourself sometimes. And I even still do. And I'm always looking for them. So we'll move on to ducks. Drakes, which are male ducks, you might hear me use that term drake, and I'm meaning male ducks when I say that, are generally straightforward to distinguish between species just because they're usually very flashy. Whereas the hens, which are the females, are much more cryptically patterned, and that's because they're left with the child rearing duties. Ducks have a fairly varied diet. They'll eat like vegetation, grains, fish, amphibians, uh, aquatic insects, and they're made up of several different tribes that I'll go over, such as perching ducks, dabbling ducks, diving ducks, sea ducks, scoters, and mergansers. So, perching ducks and dabbling ducks. Um, So what separates them from the other ducks that we're going to be talking about? They're all able to take off from land or water without needing a runway. So, what that means is, a lot of the diving ducks, they're a bit more heavy bodied and they need to kind of run on the water a little bit, to get some momentum to take off. But, perching ducks and dabbling ducks can take off straight up from the water. They eat a more vegetation heavy diet from the surface of the water or just underneath, by dabbling or tipping up, which is where the duck will basically like tip up and have its head like straight down in the water and its butt and feet will be like up in the air, like kicking. And even though they are able to dive, they rarely do. If you see like a mallard diving, odds are it's probably pretty hungry, or there's a really, really easy to catch food source right below. Their legs are more centered in their bodies, compared to other ducks, and this is because they spend a heck of a lot more time on land, than diving ducks. So they need to be able to walk around more confidently. So, perching ducks, we have wood duck. Um, as the name might suggest, they like being in trees, in the woods. And in the springtime, you'll often see them when you're in the range, male and female wood ducks kind of flying between tree to tree, looking for suitable nesting cavities. And the drake of this species is probably the one of the nicest birds in North America. If not the world, it's a beautiful duck. They have that dark green head and crest with that white pattern and the bright red eye. Beautiful bill. They have these like just deep chestnut color on the front, and they're just really nice looking ducks. Um, and the hen is much more subtle. Um, she has a kind of keyhole shape around her eye that's white, and she also has a very, very dark blue wing patch that's bordered by white. And this is one of the ducks that has a very distinctive call. So yeah, no other duck sounds like that, and no other duck looks like the wood duck. So yeah, easy to identify and a really nice bird to see. So moving on, these two ducks are sort of similar in appearance. We have American widgeon and green-winged teal. We can see that they both have that kind of greenish eye stripe that extends down the back of the neck. So yeah, very good ID feature. Widgeons, however, this green is a lot kind of it's a lot brighter than the one on the green-winged teal, and a good ID feature, at least for male widgeon, is this bright white forehead. And the nickname of this duck, I haven't heard a lot of people call it that lately, but is bald pate. So it's basically like calling it a baldy, like because this feature really does show up, like even from several hundred meters away. You can see this bright forehead, and you know it's a widgeon. Um, on the green-winged teal, this green stripe actually doesn't really show up that green in the field. It looks more like dark. And so yeah, the best feature for a Drake green-winged teal at a distance, at least in my experience, is this white spur of feathers that comes up. Um, this is also very noticeable, even from several hundred meters away. Um, Other features for widgeon, they have a very like roundish head, and and that bill is nice and like blue, like it's a very unique color for ducks. And the female green-winged teal is fairly drab. She kind of looks like a small female mallard, but her bill is going to be a solid dark color. And green-winged teals are also very tiny. They're one of the smallest ducks we have. I think they might be around the same size as the bufflehead, but luckily these two species do have fairly interesting call notes. So we'll do the widgeon first. So yeah, very unique sound for the widgeon. I always think it sounds like scraping your fingernails across one of those like 3D plastic printouts. I don't know, we used to get them when we were younger, but and then let's hear the green-winged teal. So it's a little quiet, that recording, but more of like a peeping. All right, so on to Gadwall. So these are the kind of like plain Jane um, members of the dabbling duck community. Most dabbling ducks, the males are quite flashy, colorful, but as we can see from the bottom left photo, this is a Drake um, Gadwall. Not a lot of color. but they are beautiful in their own way. Um, so yeah, the only real distinguishing feature that like sticks out like color wise is they have this white wing patch here, which is actually a really good indicator of a gadwall. You can see that in flight as well as when they're resting on the water or roosting. Um, you can also kind of see they have this like kind of cinnamon colored feathers in front of their white wing patch. That's less visible most of the time, usually only in flight. Um, Structurally, the gadwall is fairly unique. It has a very square-shaped head, like compared to other ducks. It's very square, um, and they're more dainty than similar-looking species. Like the hen gadwall does look a lot like a hen mallard, but they are a decent amount smaller, and their bill is a different shade. So the female gadwall has more of an orange bill with black on top, and it's not splotchy black. It's like a black line on top. And yeah, other than that, there's really not many ID features. They both have kind of darker bills, but like this one looks orange, but they really show up more as like a kind of like a line between the orange and black in the field. So, mallard and American black duck. Mallard, like Canada geese, doesn't really need any introduction. They're one of our most common bird species. And actually on iNaturalist, the mallard is the most commonly reported species in the world. I think they have like something like 870,000 observations on iNaturalist. So very common. They're very adaptable, and the mallard is a species that never used to be out east here. They kind of were able to expand their population with the advent of farming in Ontario and Manitoba, and they were able to kind of advance eastward. So they're kind of a new visitor to the East Coast, relatively speaking. And yeah, we'll just do this is your classic quacking. So yeah, we actually have like three different types of calls that we heard in that little series there. We had the like contact call, which is just like the single quacks. We have the comeback call, which is the kind of like descending series of quacks, and then we have the chuckling, which kind of just sounds like they're laughing a little bit. Black ducks sound very similar. They're a little bit huskier sounding. But you probably wouldn't want to use that ID feature if you're not seeing the bird because they do sound very similar, and there is a lot of regional variation in their voice. Um, Appearance wise, the black duck is, as the name suggests, is very dark. It's not black, but it's very dark. The body is kind of like this, um, almost like a chocolate or coffee brown, like it is, and the drakes are much darker than the hens. Um, but a good feature for black ducks is that they have this really dark body and back and black back of their wings, but their head is much paler. So there's this nice contrast between the pale head and the very dark body. And when they're flying, look out for these white underwings on a black duck. They really stick out like a sore thumb against the dark body. And another feature of the black duck is that they have these kind of purple, dark purple and blue wing patches, or speculums they're also called. Um, and on a black duck, this will show no white at all, this wing patch. Whereas the mallard, as we can see on the wings, they have these white borders on top and below of that wing patch. A hen mallard, I mentioned in the previous slide, her bill is orange, but it has orange or dark splotches all over it. Um, so the gadwall will kind of just be like one solid block on top of darker color, whereas the mallard will be more splotchy. And these two species are almost genetically identical, which means that they will hybridize very easily with each other. And that's actually one of the reasons the black duck has had a few declines in recent years since the mallard has shown up, is because they're able to hybridize, and um, the mallards are much more successful as a species. So usually when that happens, the more successful species ends up kind of edging out the less adaptable species, in this case, the black duck. And if you see what you think is a black duck, but it has kind of like any white edging on this wing patch, or it has any kind of like greenish sheen on top of its head, that usually means it has some mallard DNA mixed in. So blue-winged teal, this is one of my favorite ducks. And unfortunately, it's also one of the ones that's experiencing the biggest declines. They like, yeah, these small like beaver pond areas. Yeah, they're just a really beautiful duck. Drake is unmistakable, really, with anything else. They have this large white crescent right between the bill and the eye, and that's a really good ID feature. And their head, these pictures don't show it very well, but their head is kind of like a cold blue, like a darker blue. Um, and the hens, they're fairly subdued in color, more of a lighter brown than a lot of the other hen ducks we see. Um, and it may not seem like much, but they have a white patch right behind their bill, or not a white patch, but a patch of lighter color right behind their bill. And it looks subtle, but it really does stick out in the field, and it's a really good ID feature um, for telling a female blue-winged teal, because they are a bit trickier, because they do look very similar to a lot of other species, but they do have that pale area right behind the bill. Um, and blue-winged teal, as the name suggests, they have a blue section on their wing. It's powder blue on the greater coverts here, and they also have this nice emerald green wing patch down here, along with the bronze body, which with black spots in the drake. So lots of good ID features to distinguish the blue-winged teal from others. Um, yeah, really nice looking duck. Northern shoveler. This is another fairly flashy duck. Really easy to tell this species, possibly one of the easiest, simply because they have an absolutely massive bill. Like it's huge. And these pictures don't even do it justice. Like when you see them in the field, like if they're swimming, like it looks like the bill is like weighing down their head, because their heads are usually like um looks like they're bowed down a little bit. Um, so these are fairly closely related to the blue-winged teal. We can see in the photo on the right, they also have that kind of powder blue upper wing patch and that emerald green lower wing patch, kind of separated by white. Um, Difference is the shoveler has this massive bill, a completely green head in the drake, and also in the drake is this brilliant white chest, which is unique. And yeah, I find the females, the hens look a lot like a hen mallard, but again, that bill is just unmistakable. And these guys are interesting in the way they feed. They kind of they'll like kind of like spin around a little bit and like kick up stuff and make the water all turbulent and then kind of strain stuff out with their big bill. Northern pintail. This is another duck that has been suffering from declines in recent years. Although I don't think we have a really good handle on why. They're a really beautiful duck. They're very elegant looking. Um, they almost like when they're flying, they almost remind me of like a goose, just because they have this great big long neck. They have these long narrow wings. So they kind of like their shape is more goose-like. But the males, really beautiful. They have this white chest, and that whiteness kind of extends up the back of the neck a little bit into this like spur. We can see it better in the flight photo. As the name suggests, pintail, the drakes have this long tail, which is uncommon for ducks. There's another species of duck that has a long tail. We'll get to that later. And they also have this longer, I should say, longer than most dabbling ducks, kind of thinner bluish bill, which is a great ID feature. And the hens will have that feature as well. Um, yeah. But yeah, look out for that long neck. And they tend to be a little bit more pale overall than like a hen mallard or something. Oop. So yeah, these guys also have a unique call. Oop. So yeah, very unique call for those guys. And actually, pintails, they actually further to my goose point, they actually will hang out in cornfields a lot more than a lot of other duck species, which is a another goose characteristic. So that was it for the dabbling ducks, and we'll move on to diving ducks, sea ducks, scoters, and mergansers. Some people just group these into what we call divers because they dive. Um, so what makes them divers? They require a short runway for takeoff with a couple exceptions. Most food is obtained from below the water surface, usually a mix of plants, aquatic insects, fish, and amphibians. Many species in this family have like fairly black and white plumage, especially the drakes, but the females also have a lot of white on their wings, especially. So we'll start with ringneck duck. So I've always called this duck a marsh diver. They tend to be found more in like pond environments and smaller water bodies. And this is actually a duck that doesn't need a runway, or this is a diving duck that doesn't need a runway. It can take off straight up from the water. Um, Good features for this duck. We can see this. They've got a really peaked head, so their head is like almost like a triangle. Um, Very good feature. Both hen and drake have that feature. Another good feature is a white ring around the bill, more evident in the drakes. Female's a little more subtle, but it's still there. On the drake, there's this white spur on the flank. This little spur here, it comes up into the black feathering. Really good ID feature. You can see that from quite a ways away. And despite its name, the ringneck duck, you can almost never see the ring around its neck. You can see it in this photo. It's like a dark chestnut colored ring that you can really only see if the duck's really close and the light is shining a certain way. I imagine whoever named this duck probably had it like in their hand when they named it because yeah, that's the ring neck is not a good ID feature. It should be called a ring-billed duck, in my opinion. So scops, greater and lesser. These are very hard to tell apart. Even like for myself, I spend a lot of time picking through waterfowl flocks, and unless the ducks are close or I see them fly by really well, I'll just call them scaup species instead of trying to separate. The greater scaup has generally a rounder, more blocky head, um, whereas the lesser scaup has a more peaked head, we call, or like, I don't know, they kind of have like a little bump on the back sometimes, but it's not always evident. Like their feathers change with their resting posture and stuff like that, and whether they're wet or not. Um, so yeah, there's not a great way to tell these species apart if you don't see them close up or if they're flying. Greater scaup has a white wing bar that it more or less extends to the tip of the feathers, you can see here. And the lesser scaup, the white kind of stops midway up the wing. But as you can see, it's still fairly pale on these primary feathers. So, um, yeah, it's kind of hard to tell these two apart. Another ID feature is the scaup or the greater scaup tends to have a bigger nail on the end of its bill. That's that little black tip of the bill is called the nail than the lesser scaup. You can't really tell from these pictures, but lesser scaup has a much smaller nail. Um, Hens of this species, structurally similar to the drake, um, kind of like a brown plumage, and they have that big white patch at the base of their bill. But yeah, and lesser scaups are more likely to be found on smaller bodies of water, whereas greater scaups are more of a big water bird. But other than that, like you might as well just call them scaup species unless you get a really, really good look at them. So this is the other duck I was mentioning before with the long tail, and what a fitting name, the long-tailed duck. Um, they have a bunch of different plumages. I believe this is the winter plumage bird, and this plumage is a summer bird. Although I always thought that the color should be switched because the winter plumage looks a lot flashier, in my opinion. Um, but they have a really neat sound. Um, and they're kind of more of an offshore bird, so you don't get to hear it as much, but so yeah, they'll congregate in large groups offshore. And yeah, in the spring, if you're near a bigger body of water and you hear something that sounds like an alien or something, there's a good chance it's some long-tailed ducks displaying out on the water. Common goldeneye. So right off the bat, goldeneye, they have a golden eye, but so do many other duck species. Um, the drakes of this species are very like black and white, like they have this, they're very contrasting, and they also have this circular spot right in front of the eye, which is really a good ID feature for the drakes. And the hens, they have a white wing patch back here, which is visible at resting. They have these unique shaped head. It's very like large and kind of peaked at the front and back. And the female's bill, sometimes it's has a yellow tip, sometimes it's solid color. Um, this is another duck that is a tree nester. So like the wood duck, it nests in tree cavities. And there's a nickname for this duck, and it's Whistler. And I'll play the sound here. So that's the sound their wings make when they fly. And although a lot of ducks will make slight whistling, um, the common goldeneye, it's really evident. Bufflehead. This is the other smallest duck we have other than the green-winged teal. These guys are just really tiny and they're awesome. Yeah, they have these big white patches at the back of their head, the drakes, um, along with a kind of white body and black back. And the hens, they have this nice little pale patch right behind the eye. Um, but yeah, they're really nice ducks. They're closely related to the goldeneye, so they're also a cavity nester. But yeah, they're it's hard to mistake this duck species for anything else around here that we'll see regularly. Just they're so small and their patterning is so distinctive. Common eider. So, unless we're this is a species that if we're up in the James Bay or Hudson's Bay coast, we're likely to see, but if we're anywhere but those locations, we probably won't see that in Ontario. Um, these are like sea ducks, what we refer to as sea ducks. Um, there's several different subspecies in North America. There's the subspecies in Hudson's Bay is it's called sedentaria, but they don't really migrate at all. They just stay in Hudson's Bay all year. So as we can see, the male very distinctive. They have this kind of I don't even know how to describe that greenish, like light green or avocado green, and this kind of unique bill shape where it looks like the bill like kind of extends back onto the head a bit. And the hen, very kind of drab overall, dark, kind of chocolate brown. And a helpful ID feature with these, the hens especially, is that it looks like there's this kind of inclusion of feathers into the bill. And that's a very distinctive feature on the eiders, at least for the hens anyways. Scoters. So we have three species of scoters that we regularly see here. Although fairly uncommon, they do pass through yearly. Black scoter, surf scoter, and white-winged scoter. So the black scoter is probably the most uncommon one. Usually what you'll see, the birds you'll see passing through look like the bottom left photo. They have that kind of like pale cheek, like their whole cheek is pale, and that's a really good ID feature for them. Um, the males, they have this, they're all like jet black, and they have this yellow knob on the front of their bill. So very distinctive. Um, Surf scoter, we can see the male has this like big honkin' multicolored bill. He's got a really white forehead and a jet black body. Um, Hard to mistake him for anything else. The hen, on the other hand, can be tricky to differentiate from the white-winged scoter, um, just because their head patterning is fairly similar. And these ducks tend to hang out kind of a little bit further offshore, so it's kind of harder to get a good look at them. But one thing we notice is that he's or she's all plain brown. There's no white to be seen on the body. And the white-winged scoter, males again, jet black body. Um, they have kind of a little bit of a white comma shaped pattern below their eye, and they have this really, really white wing patch, and that's always there on these white-winged scoters, and you can usually always see that when they're swimming and flying. So mergansers are very unique. They have these long, thin, serrated bills, and that's because mergansers are mainly after fish and stuff that's moving around fairly quickly. So they need that kind of like thin, grippy bill to grab onto like tadpoles or small fish or whatever. Um, the two bigger mergansers, red-breasted merganser is more of a big water bird. Um, think like the Great Lakes. They're very common on the Great Lakes. I don't see them as much around here. We have smaller lakes. You get them on Nipissing every now and then, but um, yeah, so they look fairly similar, but fairly easy to tell apart. If we remember a few of the key ID features. The red-breasted merganser, the forehead is quite steep. Um, so where the top of the head kind of meets the bill is a lot steeper. They have a bit of a thinner bill as well compared to the common merganser. Um, and if we look at the neck coloration, at least on the hen here, we can see that there's kind of like a gradual color change from the breast up to the head. But on a common merganser, that color is not a gradual change. It just kind of abruptly ends. Um, and also on the common merganser hen, the females have this nice white chin here. Um, and yeah, like the beaks are a lot heavier, much more kind of sloped forehead as opposed to steep. And they both have white wing patches. And common mergansers will also nest in trees along with on the ground, but red-breasted mergansers are just a ground nester. So yeah, we can see these white wing patches, which are show up really well in flight. And we have our tiny merganser, our hooded merganser. And these guys usually will be seen kind of in smaller bodies of water, beaver ponds, small lakes, etc. Um, but yeah, the male is one of the nicest ducks. Like they have this really big white crest that they can raise and lower at will. You can see this guy has looks like a crab or something. Um, but yeah, kind of unmistakable. They have that black head. They have a really golden eye and this kind of like I don't know how you describe that color, but they have this kind of like reddish brown sides on them, the males anyways, and they have this big spur coming up the side. And the females are structurally very similar to the male, but they don't have the that coloration. They have kind of like a brown mohawk and that thin bill they also have. But yeah, hooded mergansers actually they hybridize quite regularly with species like common goldeneye and bufflehead. Um, they produce some really cool looking hybrids. All right, so we're done with waterfowl, and but we're not done the presentation yet. We still need to go over non-waterfowl. So there's lots of birds that might look like ducks and geese, but are not. They just share similar habitats and shapes. So we're going to be looking at loons, grebes, rails and cranes, pelicans and cormorants, and herons. So we have the iconic Canadian common loon, which everybody I'm sure is familiar with the call. Beautiful. Um, and the red-throated loon, which I didn't include a call because they breed up in the Arctic, so you'd be far less likely to hear their call. Um, and they're also tend to hang out in deeper water. or further offshore. Um, so the summer plumage common loon is very, very distinctive. Um, that black and white checkerboard pattern, that all black head, that white necklace, and that huge bill are just very distinctive. Um, and the breeding plumage red-throated loon also very distinctive. They have that kind of red throat, this kind of like black and white striping that extends to the top of the head. And their bill is theirs is quite a bit thinner, and that's one of the ID features that we use to differentiate these two species. The winter plumage common loon is a bit harder to separate from the winter plumage red-throated loon, um, especially since I mentioned before, like if you're looking at them when they're like a few hundred meters offshore, um, they can look very similar, but the red-throated loon is quite tiny compared to the common loon. Their bill is much thinner, more like a dagger-like, um, and their head is not as blocky and square like the common loon. Here we can see they have a very like heavy, like square head, whereas the red-throated is much more compact and rounded. But yeah, red-throated loon inland in Ontario, fairly rare to see. Bit easier to see them on the coast, northern coast in James Bay. But yeah, common loon, pretty common as long as there's undisturbed lakes. Grebes. Three grebes that I'll be going over: pied-billed, red-necked, and horned grebe. Um, Grebes in general, they kind of like don't have tail feathers, which is a great ID feature. They're just kind of like ends, like they just kind of end, like there's no tail. It just looks like they have like a fuzzy butt. Um, Pied-billed grebe would be our most familiar one. I imagine a lot of you have probably heard them. But yeah, they're very tiny, these grebes. They're probably about the size of like a green-winged teal, but they have a very, very loud voice that just like projects across the marsh. Um, and the pied-billed grebe also has a summer and winter plumage. So the summer plumage, fairly kind of subdued coloration. We have like a bluish bill with a black band around it. So pied billed. And pied, I think usually means like, I don't know, patches of color, but I think it's usually reserved for black and white, as far as I know. And then the winter plumage pied-billed grebe looks pretty much the same, except his bill is a little different. Red-necked grebe sounds like a horse whinnying a little bit. But the summer plumage adults very distinctive. They have this bright white chin strap, we call it, or cheeks, um, and this really reddish neck, which actually can stand out quite a bit depending on how the sun is. And the winter plumage, and the red-necked grebe also has this of quite a long bill for grebe. And the winter plumage or juvenile plumage birds, um, fairly just like kind of like a grayish, like a darker grayish tones, and that longer bill, which retains a bit of yellow even in the winter plumage. Horned grebe, very small, kind of hangs out more offshore during migration. They have this like golden kind of like horns, I guess they're called, or um, eye tufts. Um, and what we're most likely to see, is the winter plumage. Um, they have this like tiny short little bill, uh, a white cheek, which might be confusing with the red-necked grebe, but these guys are so much smaller. And again, that grebe body that just kind of ends without any tail feathers. So, yellow rail. This is a species at risk, and there's actually been some interest from different organizations in the Mushkegowuk and Iwichti regions to study this bird. Um, it's very small. It's only about the size of a large sparrow, and rarely seen. It's hard to get any photos of this guy because they basically scurry through the grass like a little mouse. Um, Most likely way you're going to observe this species is by hearing their call, which sounds like two pebbles being ticked together, and they have this very distinctive pattern. Tick, 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 tick. I'll play the call here. So very distinctive call. Would be hard to confuse this with anything else, but we wanted to include it anyways, just because it's a species at risk and there's a lot of interest towards it. So um, very small, very cryptic. Sandhill crane. Familiar sound to a lot of us, I'm sure. But yeah, another bird that's kind of hard to mistake for anything else, although there is one bird coming up that you can mistake it with. When they're walking around on the ground, it's obvious what they are usually. They're so tall, and they're really the only bird like this that's you're gonna see in the middle of a field or in the bush or something. Um, and they have a nice long bill and this red forehead, and there's some nice cute little babies there. But in flight, and this is really important for IDing the sandhill crane, is that they will leave their neck and their legs extended straight out. And unlike, oh, well, I'll go back to that one later, but the other species that you might be able to confuse this one with is the great blue heron, but there's a key ID feature that will help you with that. White pelican, American white pelican. This is a bird that we're seeing more and more in Ontario. There's been an established population in northwestern Ontario for a number of decades now, and they breed in Point Pelee area as well. And I know a lot of people have been seeing them in James Bay, like Moosonee. There'll be a few flocks circling around every spring, it seems like. Unmistakable bird, just massive, all white with these black wingtips and this huge bill, like yellow bill. It's impossible to mistake this for any other bird, I would imagine. And a closely related bird to the pelican is the double-crested cormorant. So cormorants have been really increasing their populations in the past few decades. This bottom left photo kind of shows what their habitat is like. They're hanging out with some pelicans here. Um, but yeah, when you see a cormorant in the water, most of their body kind of sits below the water surface. So it just kind of looks like a neck sticking out of the water. And they usually hold their heads kind of pointed upwards, like at a bit of an upward angle instead of straight. And in flight, a good ID feature is that their head kind of sticks out almost the same length as their tail feathers, which is fairly unique looking in the air. So, great blue heron. This is the other species that you might mistake for a sandhill crane. Um, but the key ID feature, if they're in flight, is that the heron will almost always have their neck pulled back into their body somewhat. Not always the case, like if they're going in for a landing or if they're being harassed by a red-winged blackbird or something, they'll stick their neck straight out. but for the most part, when they're flying, their head is tucked into their body, which cranes won't ever do. Um, and yeah, like usually you won't see these guys hanging out in the middle of a farmer's field or in the bush, although, there's always exceptions. Um, and yeah, great blue herons have been expanding their range northward. There's colonies in Moose Factory now. Then this is what their nests kind of look like. Strangely enough, for a big lanky bird like a heron, they build these stick nests in kind of more inaccessible areas. And here's what they sound like. They have kind of one of the crazier sounding calls, just like a guttural screech. So that's the end of the ID portion. I'm just going to plug Goose Watch for Siku. If any of you are harvesting geese or ducks or anything, especially up north, you can enter your observations into Goose Watch to help with migration tracking, and you can win some pretty cool prizes. And there's lots of tools to further your education about waterfowl. Birds Canada has some great resources, um, all about birds put on by the Cornell Lab. Um, eBird is great for submitting checklists and just monitoring birds in your area. And Xenocanto is an excellent resource for finding bird calls and all sorts of calls. That's where most of my audio is sourced from, is Xenocanto. And also Dendroica is another good audio um, program for listening to bird calls. Miigwech, and thank you. Stay tuned for boreal and coastal James Bay story maps coming soon.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Lucas, for the great presentation, and Graham for looking after the chat throughout the presentation. Since we are over time, I think we're just going to hold off on the Q&A just so people who have to go can go. And I'll stop the recording. But if there's people who want to stay on to ask questions, we can ask afterwards. But thank you everybody for joining us today. As a reminder, next week will be our final bird identification webinar, and it will be on shorebirds identification. So hope to see you then, same time, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. on Friday, June 19th. Hope to see you then. Thanks.